We're going to get more information on them if we can. But this leads us to the final part of the discussion today, which is going to be a little bit longer and a little bit more in depth as to what we see as some of the challenges right now that are facing the urban eVTOL market. And that is what the ridership experience is actually going to be like when people finally, by all means, get on board one of these aircraft, and what their expectations are going to be, and how their actual experience will go.
I mean,
Right?
for me, as we kind of segue into this part, anybody watching this clip later, have you been on a small aircraft? And I mean, like, a small single engine Cessna, something of that size, small, well, any kind of helicopter. Have you been on a helicopter? And where did you go? How long was your flight? How was the ride?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we'd like to hear that stuff in the comments below. So just put some stories down there, and we'll
Yeah.
station goes.
Okay, so the difference between what general people know, most people's experience in flight is sitting in the back of a major air carrier, usually in an aircraft with a length of over 100 feet long and a wingspan somewhere in, usually 60 feet or greater. And the difference being is that those ride at different levels in the atmosphere, different speeds. And obviously, you've known if you've ever been in the back of one, anything from an Embraer 145 or a baby Learjet, or even up to, say, an Airbus or larger A320, all the way up to 747s, they do eventually hit turbulence and they do eventually shake. And the reason for this is because the Earth's surface heats unequally in different segments, because a grass surface will absorb solar radiation at a different rate than a mossy surface, which is dark, and a watery surface or some other feature will heat at a different rate if it's covered with trees. And then finally, the terrain might actually have wind passing over it, which will actually launch air currents, especially coming up and down mountains, so high up into the atmosphere that it creates turbulence along your route. Okay. And this is pretty fairly common. And if you're in a small aircraft, it's generally, and I do say generally, expected that your ride will be a little bumpy.
Yeah.
Depending on what you're flying over. So the first
time of day, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Right. So actually, that's another thing. Corey, you just brought it up. If it's daytime and the sun's out, ride's going to be generally bumpy. Nighttime, temperatures cool off. It's going to be a lot less bumpy. So you're probably going to see a lot less surface heating. And when we talk about convective currents, that's a rising column of air. Okay, hotter air. And when we see convection, that's usually going to lead to some sort of thunderstorm or cloud activity, which means the ride will get bumpy. So the first example that we have for you here is, and just so everybody knows, every one of these videos that we're about to show, the time that these videos were taken, because I know personally when they were taken, no one that was in command of the aircraft was not abiding by their duties. Number one. Number two, no passengers were being transported for compensation or for hire, including in the jet ones. We were actually ferrying the aircraft, so there was no actual passengers on board. And lastly, everything was done that there was a pilot monitoring everything else going on inside the aircraft at the time. So if anybody has any questions about that, you can write into the show all you want, but that's the only time the camera comes out.
We know we might get a few comments. What are you guys doing? Taking video when you're flying?
Right. Okay.
Wasn't
the way it is.
Commercial optics.
There you go. So this first video shows you guys basically what it's like to be in a Bell 407 about 600 feet, flying on a day with partly cloudy skies, average temperatures around 80 degrees, and roughly about, again, 600 feet. And you can see that the camera's going to shake quite a bit. And this is the type of ride that one person could expect at this particular moment in an aircraft like this. And as you can see, this is a backseat ride, and the cabin is actually pitching on its axis, and you can see that the ride is fairly bumpy. Now, in comparison to that, this one is going to be a slightly different video. It's going to be the same aircraft, same day, different location. This time, this is going to be out over the Gulf of Mexico, roughly 1,000 feet, cloudless skies, same air temperature, same conditions. And this one, you're going to notice that the aircraft is actually way more stable. And Corey is going to speak to you a little bit about why that is.
Yeah, so again, this one's offshore. You can see quite a nice day. But one thing we also mentioned, that air's a bit more stable. There's not as much varying differences in where the air is trying to move. So when air is not at the same temperature in one place, the air wants to move around and get to a bit equilibrium and or rise as hot air does, right? And you get some air movements. So, but offshore, it's all water, it's all ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Ocean basically heats up the same rate, and so everything's pretty stable.
Right. Okay. So, and what you may or may not know is what we know in the business is something as winds flow from high to low, right? So if there's a high pressure air mass, right, and it's sitting in an area, what's going to happen is that high air pressure air mass is going to try to fill in the location of a low pressure air mass, right? And what we generally know as a guide is when we're looking at the surface, low air pressure usually means that it's hot and less dense and likely to rise. And what forms this other column of air underneath it is actually the high pressure air rushing in to squeeze or the pressure differential around it. So now we're going to go into a different aircraft. This one is in a Cessna. This one we're operating, I think, about 1,000 feet. It's a partly cloudy day. It's more humid, generally more overcast, just in a mid-level layer of air. And this is probably going to be one of the areas that these aircraft that people are looking for urban air mobility might be operating on a regular basis, because you're only going to do short hops of under 50 miles. To go to 10,000 feet or higher is nearly a waste of time and energy. So here we go. Without further ado, this one is just a basic Cessna, about 20 seconds of a clip. And you can see once again the stability. The camera's shaking a little bit. It's a fairly smooth but a little bumpy ride, as we're kind of in between two layers at a basic altitude on your everyday standard flight. Okay, not to be outdone though, this very same flight, just moments later on final approach, actually yielded totally different results. This one is coming in on final, and we're a little lower in the altitude. No, excuse me, this one's just below the clouds. We're not on final yet. This is just below the clouds. Precip on final. Yeah, this is the one. So take a look at this one. Little different, and now you're going to see the camera bounce around quite a bit more inside of this precip, these moving air masses. And you can see the camera stability is a little different. So that's part of the dynamic here. So let's talk about that one a little bit more. This is on average weather that you might encompass just about anywhere in the country, any given day between, say, spring to fall.
Yep.
So the ride can be fairly bumpy.
And I mean, I think one thing we'll point out is probably everybody out there has driven in a car, but then encounters a rainstorm on a road that's really heavy rain and maybe gets a bit uncomfortable with how heavy it is. Whether that's the road surface is a bit wetter, more wet than you like, or visibility is just really low and you're kind of uncomfortable with that. One thing to always keep in mind about maybe the comparison there is, in a car, you're still on Earth, like touching the ground, and the car can obviously move in some directions, but it doesn't have that next dimension that you do in the air.
Right.
Obviously, everybody, when we're talking about training people to fly, you could always pull a car over. You can always pull over if you need to. That stuff doesn't happen in the air. And these are things that obviously, as you're listening to us talk, of course, right, Corey, Mike, of course that's the case.
Sure.
But if you're in an air taxi or an urban air mobility vehicle, it's just something to keep in mind that if you have people that maybe haven't really been on a boat, haven't really been airsick before, that's just not something they're used to, and then they get on something that's relatively light comparing to like a bigger jet, these lighter vehicles.
Right.
It's the same weather that would not affect a larger aircraft as much will affect these because they're lighter. What speed? Some of these are going to go fairly quick, but a lot of them are going to be a bit slower. And that's why we're showing you these videos to compare the altitude and airspeed that is somewhat comparable in weight of aircraft to what you would envision we'll be getting it in air taxis. We know some air taxis are planning to go a bit slower. We know some planning to go a bit faster. There's different ones. We get
which
that.
Makes a difference.
We've covered a whole bunch of those. We
Right.
we understand that. This is kind of just to give you an idea, and maybe have you think about things you thought about if you yourself have not really spent much time in or any time in a light aircraft at relatively low level.
And here's the big thing. Speed makes a difference. At 140 knots, and a lighter aircraft is going to react differently than an aircraft that's going about 250 knots, because that sweet speed is about 200 knots. 200 knots gets you to go fast enough where you can ride through these currents fairly quickly and not have it impact the ride as severely, okay? So this one we're going to go to, this is your average day of flying. This is mid-level, roughly about 8,000 feet. You're just above a small layer of clouds. otherwise what would be considered a perfect day of flying, and you're going to see that this is going to be a fairly smooth ride.
Looks great.
Looks great.
Yep.
Camera's barely bouncing.
Nice VFR weather.
Yeah.
All right, that's something else we haven't talked about, particularly IFR versus VFR.
Oh, we'll go into that.
But we'll probably get there in a moment.
Yeah. Okay, so now the one that I played in error before was, now we're going to go back and just take a look. I played this one while Corey was speaking, because this is actually what it's like to be on a final approach in this level of clouds. Now we're below clouds, 600 feet, final approach, a little bit of light precipitation. This is not extreme weather because you can actually see through it. You'll actually see on the actual approach that we are on here, you can see half the airfield is covered in sun. The other half is covered in shade from the clouds. And we're going to roll this clip, and you're going to see how absolutely bumpy this can get.